Mr. Peightel, and I'm recommending a book called A Hero of France by Alan First. It's an historically accurate novel about the French resistance during World War II. But to call First's novels spy novels is really to minimize them. I've read all 13 of First's books, going back to Night Soldiers, which opens with the fascist thugs stomping a man to death in the streets of Bulgaria in 1934. In his books, First masterfully recreates the dark alleys of Europe between 1934 and 1935 as the German Gestapo and the Soviet NKVD battle for control. Unlike most spy thrillers, say James Bond or Jason Bourne, where there's one character who appears in all the books over and over again, and that character has sort of extraordinary abilities, each of First's books has a different main character, and it's always an ordinary person whose small actions require enormous risks. People who, just doing their ordinary jobs, wind up fighting tyranny. In Hero of France, this book that I read this summer, we meet a man named Matthew, a businessman who leads a resistance cell that helps pilots shot down over France escape back to England. One of the things that I like most about the book is that it explores the moral complexity of the resistance to evil. Early on in the book, Matthew has a conversation with Ghislaine, his counselor and second in command. And I'll read a portion of that now. They've been discussing whether they should take action to prevent somebody, one of their compatriots, from informing on them, and whether there could be reprisals if they do. And Matthew says, "We don't do such things, Ghislaine." "Not yet we don't." Ghislaine sat back. "That's always the question with underground work. How rough do you play the game? I knew a man a few years ago, a Russian. He'd been to some training school for the secret services, and he told me that his instructor had played a sort of game with one of the students. He asked him, 'Suppose your country had been suddenly occupied. You never expected any such thing, but it has happened. Then, one afternoon, your phone rings. It's a man you've seen now and again, not quite a friend, who says he's in your city for the day and needs a favor. It seems he has a heavy package. He can't carry it around from office to office. Can he leave it with you? It's hard to say no, so you say yes. An hour later, a man shows up at your door with a package. Your friend couldn't come, so this man agreed to deliver the package. He'll be back later to pick it up. You wait, and then, quite a bit later than you'd imagine, someone else shows up and takes the package. Now you sense you've been drawn into someone's secret operation. A week goes by, and here's your friend again on the telephone. 'Thank you for helping us,' he says. 'Us?' Which confirms what you had feared. You've given them a hold over you. Now he needs one last favor and makes it clear you don't have a choice. Do it, or they'll give your name to the police. I understand,' your friend says, 'that you know X, and that the two of you have lunch now and then.' How do they know that? Why not make a lunch appointment with him for next Monday, say, at 1 o'clock at such and such a restaurant? It's only a lunch, so you agree. Then, morning before the lunch, your friend calls and says, 'You are meeting X at 1. At 1:20, excuse yourself and go to the WC.' You follow orders, and the assassins arrive a few minutes later. You and all the other customers run like hell. From now on, you belong to them, whoever they are. Or take a different view. You refuse to accept the package, and that afternoon, your friend is arrested and shot. Well, you just avoided a serious problem. But you didn't, because the occupier is later expelled from your country, and a week later, somebody shows up and says he's from the Justice Committee, and you stand accused of causing the death of a patriot. It was quiet in the office. Then Matthew said, Ghislaine, you are suggesting that sometime in the future we will operate that way? Tomorrow, no. But if the British lose this war, and there's some chance they might, we may become desperate. And desperation leads to actions described by the Soviet instructor. As you get deeper into the book, you're forced to consider the relationship between resistance and terrorism. I'd give this book 4.5 stars out of 5. My only complaint is I wish it had been longer. Otto Brehm, a former Hamburg police detective who becomes a major in the Wehrmacht military police, is a deeply interesting character. I wish that first would have gone even deeper into his mind to see more of how an ordinary person can perpetrate evil just by being good at his job. Questions?
So you said there were like 13 books total?
Mm-hmm.
Does the pace or theme kind of change along the way, or does it stay steady?
Yeah, it's a series, but it's not a series in the way that you think of it sometimes, where it's the same character or repeated settings. Or the thing that holds it all together is that they're historically accurate about Europe during the years before and during World War II. But some of the books are longer than others, like the early ones that I read. The one I liked best was the second one, called Dark Star. And it examined the role, like the history of how Stalin came to power in Soviet Russia through the purges in 1937, how he killed off all his enemies. And it goes really deeply into that history. And it's really interesting because you're getting history in the form of an exciting story. So the pace is fast, even though that particular book is like 400 pages long. But some of them, like this one, is a little bit shorter and looks at just sort of one small incident from that history of the pre-war and the Second World War. Bonnie?
In all of the novels, is it kind of the same theme that like all the novels that he wrote? Is it like the same theme?
It's always the consistent theme would be the struggle between good and evil, and the complexity of that struggle, how the people trying to do good sometimes have to do things that are evil, and so that is a kind of a consistent theme, and also the fact that it took the sacrifices of a lot of ordinary people to stop the Nazi and fascist takeover of Europe. But they also paid a price for that, because Eastern Europe fell under Soviet tyranny. So there's nothing really easy about what happens in these novels. It's a lot of gray areas, and that's what's really interesting about them. Brett?
Around like one time period, or is there some from like different times?
They're all set between 1934 and 1935. I mean, excuse me, 1945. But like this one is set all in 1941. Right, after the Germans have occupied France and the Allies have begun to bomb Germany, and it's about helping the pilots escape. The pilots who were shot down escape back to England. Right, so this particular book is all set in 1941. Some of them are set in individual years. Some of them have action that spans, you know, several years during that time period. Nick?
Would you recommend it to a certain group of people or like just anyone?
I would recommend it to anybody who's, excuse me, who's interested in the history of that time, because they're really accurate, and they give you a picture of a world that's sort of, in a way, older. It's like watching a black and white film. You see this older world of the 1930s and 40s, but you also see the sort of the relevance, the same sorts of questions that were faced then about how do we resist evil and tyranny. They come back to issues that we should be thinking about today. You know, what's the difference between resistance and terrorism? Right? These people, from one side, if you look at it, you know, we look at it now as these people in France, resistance fighters were heroes. But from the German point of view at the time, they were terrorists. And that's why the guy, the character Brame in this story is really interesting, because he's not a Gestapo agent. He's not, you know, he's not filled with evil and hatred. He's an ordinary policeman doing his job really well, and by doing that job really well, he winds up perpetrating evil. I mean, he's in the service of evil, but he's an ordinary guy doing his job, and that's really an interesting thing. Other questions? Yeah, Chris.
What's the title of the first book?
The first one is called Night Soldiers.
Do they ever give like the names of like the spies?
Yeah, you meet them. In each book, whoever the main character is sometimes it's like a newspaper columnist, or writer. Sometimes it's a teacher or a lawyer. But you see how they go about their ordinary lives in the middle of the war's going on, or it's leading up to the war, and they're doing these dangerous things, but it's like small ordinary stuff. Like you go to the office, you make a phone call, and you get in contact with somebody who helps you, like that scene that I read where delivering a package turns out to be delivering a bomb, and it's not like Jason Bourne, where you got people running around, everybody's got a sniper rifle and it's just constant action. It's much more, the stories are much more complex than that.